There is a moment in every war when the threshold is crossed, when the language of diplomacy finally gives way to the language of ordnance. For the United States and Iran, that moment arrived in the early morning hours of February 28, 2026. But to truly understand what is unfolding right now and why the question of a ground invasion is no longer hypothetical, you have to go back much further than that. You have to understand the architecture of a confrontation that was decades in the making and how, in the span of just 17 days, it has reshaped the entire strategic map of the Middle East. The trajectory began accelerating in 2023 when Iran and Israel first began exchanging direct missile strikes in 2024, and then culminated in June 2025 when Israel and the United States conducted what they called the 12-Day War, a joint air campaign designed to destroy Iran's nuclear facilities. That operation bought time. It did not buy peace. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi declared after those June 2025 strikes that Iran had reconstructed everything that was damaged and that the military was prepared. The message was unmistakable. Airstrikes alone would not end the nuclear question. Something far more consequential was coming. When 2026 opened, Iran was sitting on 440 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% purity, enough material, if further processed, for as many as 10 nuclear weapons. American and Israeli intelligence officials understood this number acutely. They had watched Iran's centrifuges spin. They had watched the IAEA lose meaningful access to key sites, and they had watched a succession of diplomatic channels slowly collapse. In February, Oman's foreign minister, serving as mediator between Tehran and Washington, said nuclear talks were making substantial progress, with Iran willing to make concessions. President Trump said he was not thrilled with those talks. The diplomatic window closed. The military window opened. Beginning in late December 2025, massive nationwide anti-government protests erupted across all 31 of Iran's provinces, driven by economic collapse and years of suffocating misrule. They became the largest protests since the 1979 Islamic Revolution. The Iranian government responded with massacres. Different sources gave wildly different death tolls. The regime claimed around 3,000. Human rights organizations estimated as many as 32,000 dead. On January 2nd, President Trump threatened a lock-and-loaded military intervention if the government killed peaceful protesters. By January 23rd, he announced that a U.S. armada was heading to the region. These were not idle declarations. They were the opening lines of a script that would end with fire. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched coordinated military operations against Iran. President Trump confirmed that American forces had begun what he called major combat operations, stating the objective plainly: Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. Unlike the 12-day war of June 2025, this operation was fundamentally different in its ambition. Where the first campaign targeted nuclear and military facilities, leaving diplomatic room to maneuver, the opening salvo on February 28th assassinated Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, the man who had ruled Iran since 1989, along with numerous other senior Iranian officials. There would be no negotiated ceasefire this time. There was no longer anyone on the other side with the authority to sign one. The operation was named Epic Fury. The Israelis called their campaign Roaring Lion. According to U.S. Central Command, the military employed more than 20 distinct weapons systems across air, sea, land, and missile defense forces. Tomahawk cruise missiles fired from Navy destroyers in the Arabian Sea, F-A-18 and F-35 aircraft, MQ-9 Reaper drones, and for the first time in combat, the precision strike missile known as the PRSM. The United States also deployed Patriot and THAAD systems to intercept Iranian ballistic missiles. By March the 2nd, just 4 days into the operation, U.S. Central Command announced it had achieved local air superiority over western Iran and the capital, Tehran, reportedly without the confirmed loss of a single American or Israeli combat aircraft. In military terms, it was a stunning opening, but in strategic terms, the harder questions were only just beginning. By March 10th, U.S. Central Command reported that American forces had struck more than 5,000 targets inside Iran. The scale of that number is almost incomprehensible. Think about what it means. More than 5,000 discrete military decisions executed in just 12 days across a country of over 90 million people. The ACLED Conflict Monitor documented nearly 2,000 distinct attack events across at least 29 of Iran's 31 provinces, with Tehran absorbing the heaviest bombardment. Among the targets struck missile infrastructure, nuclear and military sites, energy facilities, and oil depots. According to some assessments, approximately 80% of Iran's capacity to strike Israel has been eliminated. Hundreds of Iranian missile launchers have been rendered inoperable. Iran's Navy and its fast attack craft, midget submarines, and mine-laying capabilities is being systematically destroyed. And yet Iran has not capitulated. This is the central paradox of Operation Epic Fury, the tension that is now pulling the United States toward a decision it has spent decades trying to avoid. Iran has decentralized its missile command structure, moving to mobile launchers that are far harder to detect and target from the air. Tehran's strategic calculation, according to analysts, is that the Gulf states and Israel may exhaust their defensive capabilities before Iran exhausts its remaining missiles. Even after weeks of devastating strikes, Iran continued launching weapons, not in mass salvos as before, but one or two missiles at a time designed to exhaust alert systems and sustain psychological pressure across the Gulf. This is asymmetric warfare executed with discipline, the doctrine of a power that knows it cannot win in the air but believes it can survive. The Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which 20% of the world's energy supply passes, has been effectively closed. Oil prices have surged past $100 a barrel. A record 400 million barrels of oil have been released from global strategic reserves in response. The economic tremors of this conflict are already being felt on every continent. And the human cost inside Iran has been catastrophic. Preliminary figures put Iranian civilian dead at over 1,400, with more than 18,000 injured. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees reports up to 3.2 million people have been displaced inside the country. The youngest victim of the strikes was 8 months old. Perhaps nothing illustrates the brutal and chaotic nature of this war more starkly than the events in the city of Manab in southeastern Iran. On the morning of February 28th, satellite imagery showed a Shajareh Tayyibeh elementary school standing intact at 10:23 a.m. local time. Iranian authorities announced that a strike hit the school at 10:45 a.m., 22 minutes later. Among the dead were more than 110 school children. On March 11th, U.S. Central Command confirmed that a preliminary investigation found the strike resulted from reliance on outdated intelligence data, failing to reflect the school's civilian status. It is a moment that encapsulates the terrible, irreversible weight of military campaigns conducted at scale. The gap between strategic precision and human reality that no targeting algorithm can fully close. Now, 17 days in, a question is dominating every classified briefing room in Washington, every think tank assessment, and every conversation between generals and policymakers. Is the air campaign enough? The New York Times declared that President Trump will have to grapple with two of the biggest decisions of the war: whether to attack with ground troops Karg Island and the nuclear storage facilities where approximately 970 pounds of near-bomb-grade uranium is believed to remain. That uranium is the core of the problem. Secretary of State Marco Rubio told a congressional briefing that the U.S. needed to physically secure nuclear material inside Iran, saying plainly, "People are going to have to go and get it." He did not clarify who those people would be. He did not need to. As many as 5,000 additional U.S. Marines are reportedly heading to the Middle East in what represents a possible escalation beyond the air campaign. Days after Trump appeared to suggest the conflict was nearly over, the Pentagon reportedly agreed to send additional warships and troops to bolster forces already stationed in the region. The Army's 82nd Airborne Division, an elite paratrooper unit, canceled a planned headquarters training operation, fueling speculation within the Defense Department that soldiers specializing in ground combat could be sent to the region as the conflict widens. These are not random administrative decisions. In military planning, the 82nd Airborne does not cancel training rotations without reason. The logic of the battlefield is already pulling toward the ground. President Trump himself has refused to rule out ground forces, stating, "I don't have the yips with respect to boots on the ground. Like every president says, there will be no boots on the ground. I don't say it. I say probably don't need them, or if they were necessary." Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth confirmed that no U.S. troops are currently inside Iran, but left the option explicitly on the table. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt reinforced that posture, saying, "As Commander-in-Chief, he wisely does not rule out any options. In the language of Washington, that is not ambiguity, that is preparation." Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal, emerging from a classified Senate Armed Services Committee briefing, told reporters he was the angriest I have been in my political career and warned that we seem to be on a path toward deploying American troops on the ground in Iran. The alarm coming from Capitol Hill is not partisan theater. It reflects a classified picture that senior legislators found deeply alarming: a war with clear military objectives but no diplomatic off-ramp, no coherent plan for what comes after, and a military logic that is steadily pointing toward escalation. The Wall Street Journal published a detailed assessment openly discussing the option to deploy ground troops to seize territory around the Strait of Hormuz, noting that maintaining control would require an invasion and concluding that U.S. troops might have to be deployed inside Iran for months or longer. The IRGC, 190,000 troops strong with an elite Quds force that has spent decades backing insurgencies across the Middle East, specializes in precisely the kind of asymmetric warfare that historically bleeds occupying forces dry. The lessons of Iraq and Afghanistan have not been forgotten, but history suggests that in the fog of escalating war, lessons have a way of becoming footnotes. The financial burden of this conflict is already staggering. According to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, the first 100 hours of Operation Epic Fury alone cost the United States approximately $3.7 billion, largely unbudgeted. Iran has launched retaliatory attacks on at least 27 U.S. military bases across the Middle East and struck military and civilian infrastructure in Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Oman, and the United Arab Emirates. At least 13 U.S. service members have been killed in Iranian attacks, with 6 more confirmed dead when a KC-135 refueling aircraft crashed in western Iraq. For all the talk of air dominance, this war is already killing Americans. Any ground operation would multiply that exposure exponentially. Today, March 17, 2026, Israeli officials confirmed the elimination of 2 more senior Iranian regime figures: Ali Larijani, the Secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council, and Gholam Reza Soleimani, the head of the Basij militia, Iran's primary internal repression force. Israeli officials said the strikes targeted a high-level security meeting of figures directing Iran's strategic military programs and internal security apparatus. The decapitation campaign is ongoing. The question of who ultimately controls Iran's remaining nuclear material, its surviving missile forces, and its sprawling intelligence apparatus grows more urgent with each passing day. The limits of military force against a nuclear program are real. Strikes can destroy facilities, but they cannot eliminate knowledge. The 440 kilograms of enriched uranium remains unaccounted for. Whatever regime succeeds, the current one will inherit a strategic environment in which the case for nuclear deterrence has been strengthened, not weakened. This is the paradox at the heart of Operation Epic Fury, a campaign that began to prevent nuclear proliferation may, in its aftermath, accelerate it. The destruction of the current regime does not destroy the motivation that produced the program, and motivations, unlike centrifuges, cannot be bombed. What is happening right now in the skies above Tehran, in the waters of the Strait of Hormuz, and in the classified conference rooms of the Pentagon is not simply a military campaign. It is the opening movement of a historical reckoning whose full dimensions are not yet visible. The ground invasion debate is not academic. Retired Marine Colonel Mark Kansian of CSIS told reporters, "These are the first ground combat troops that are headed to the region." The U.S. might capture Karg Island and declare a narrow victory, but the logic of the conflict would not stop there. It never does. The war that was sold to the American public as a surgical, time-limited operation to eliminate Iran's nuclear threat has already outlasted its original promise. The Strait of Hormuz is still closed. The uranium is still unaccounted for. The Marines are still moving. And in eastern Tehran, a man named Seper keeps his front door unlocked so his family can sprint to an underground garage when the explosions return. He told a reporter simply, "The war might last weeks. For now, life goes on." That sentence, quiet, resigned, devastating, is the real measure of what has begun. Not the number of targets struck or the missiles intercepted or the officials assassinated, but the life of a city of 10 million people waiting in the dark for what comes next. What comes next may well be boots on the ground. The strategic logic is already there. The hardware is already moving. The question is not whether the United States is willing to cross that threshold. The question, the one that will define the next chapter of this war, is whether it understands what lies on the other side.